Okay. Well, look at that library behind you. That's beautiful.
Well, this is actually, I had to have an extension built to my library, which my son helped me build, because what happened was, once I sold the Flamel books, they began to sell all over the world. And I suddenly, and I will get a copy of every edition from all over the world. And my son said to me one day, he said, "You have 6 books in this series, and the books have now been sold into 35 countries. So it's 35 multiplied by 6, which is a lot." He said, "You're going to need new shelves." So we had to put up these shelves behind me, and all the books you see over my shoulder are actually all the Flamels from all over the world. And in a little while, I'll show you some of the fun covers. But I got to say to you, I can only read the English ones, so I can't read the Chinese or the Japanese or the Korean or the Spanish or the German or French or Russian, but the covers look fab. They really do. So I'm talking to you from Ireland, and Ireland, as you know, is a tiny, tiny country right on the edge of the Atlantic. And Ireland is really small, and you're coming from this amazingly huge, big country. For example, I can drive from one side of Ireland to the other, which is a bit like driving from, say, New York to San Francisco, and I can do that in 90 minutes. That's how small the island is. And I can't even drive from Woodland Hills down to Sherman Oaks in 90 minutes of traffic in LA. That's how small Ireland is. And I can drive from the top of Ireland right down to the bottom, which is like driving from Alaska to Mexico City. And I can do that in about 2.5 hours. That's how small it is. And it's a very, very beautiful country. It's green because it rains every single day. We very rarely get snow because it's quite a warm climate. But it rains, and you know we have different names for rain. And today, oh, I knew that would happen. I bet you this is my mother phoning me. I'll phone you back. Goodbye.
Mr. Scott, that reminds me, you might hear a bell later on for our stroke. We'll just ignore that also.
That was actually my mother.
Oh.
So my mother would phone. So I did phone her. Now what had happened was I phoned my mother earlier, as you do, because you're supposed to speak to your mammy regularly. And I said to my mammy, "Whatever you do, don't phone me between half 6, because it's half 6 in the evening Irish time, and half 7. I said, "No, I won't. Of course I won't." So what does she do? Because that's what mammies do. Mammies don't listen to you at all. They really don't. Well, sometimes they do, but you're supposed to listen to your mammy. So I know you've got lots of questions, and I hope I've got lots of answers. I'm not sure that I do. But normally what I would do is, if I would visit your school, is I would read to you, and then you would ask me questions. However, I found that there's nothing more boring than someone like me on a screen reading to you. It's like sitting at home watching the TV, watching somebody read the news. So that's not fun at all. However, so you get to be the stars of this show, so you get to ask me the hard questions, and then I'll give you easy answers. So who's going to be really brave and ask the first question?
Well, I'm actually going to be brave and ask you some questions to get us going, if that's okay.
You can. That's a great idea. Thank you.
So as I understand it, all the books behind you are all your books that are in all those other languages.
Sure.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Okay.
The book is now in 37 countries and in 25 languages.
Wow.
Which is amazing. And what that means is that I will get email from young men and women like yourselves from all over the world who will ask me questions. And once upon a time it would have been difficult for me to answer those questions because they will write to me in their native languages, and I don't speak Chinese. But so what I do is, when I get the questions, is I drop them into Google Translator, which translates the question into English so I can read it. And then I write my answer in English. It translates it back into whatever language it is, and I can reply to everyone. That's what it is.
Wow.
Technology is wonderful.
Right, that's quite a system. Were you born in Ireland?
Yes, I was born and raised in Dublin, Ireland. And this accent that you're hearing is a proper Dublin accent. And you can always tell people from Dublin, because we cannot say our THs. So you will hear me say 1, 2, 3, and first, second, third, and you will all laugh because I've just said third. But that's how we speak. That's a proper Dublin accent.
Do you speak any other? I know, just with the extensive knowledge that you have of, it just seems like you would also speak Latin. Do you speak any other language?
Yes, I mean, I was very, very lucky when I was coming up. When I was about your ages in school, I went to a really tough school, but we learned Latin and Greek. And I would also speak Irish, which is the native Irish language, which not so many people speak, but I would speak that. And I would speak some French and some German and some Spanish and some Italian. But my speciality is older languages, dead languages. And I never thought, when I was really young, that I would find any use for Latin or Greek or Old Irish. And Old Irish is a really specialised language. But of course, that's how I spent all my life writing about these great mythological stories.
Okay. Well, and how old were you when you wrote your first book?
I was 18 when I wrote my first book. And what's really interesting now is that people think you have to be an older writer to write. Not at all. Publishers really don't care how old you are. A publisher wants to know, can you tell a story? And if you can tell a lie, and I know none of the young men and women there ever tell lies, but if you do tell a lie, that's what a story is. Because a book is nothing more than a big, fat lie. And only a couple of years ago, last year, a young girl who was 14 years of age, who had a very nice blog online, and a publisher approached her and asked her would she like to write a book. And she's 14 years of age, and she did a $250,000 deal for a book. And what you guys have to be aware of when you're writing your blogs, or if you're putting your art or your photography up online, you're exposing your work to a worldwide audience. And therefore, when you put work, when you put photography or art or poetry or fiction or anything up online, it's got to be the best work that you can do, because it's a reflection of you. So don't put any substandard work up online. Don't say, oh, it'll do, because it won't do, because you never know who's looking at it, and you never know what opportunities are open to you now.
That's an excellent point. That's good advice. Always do your best work.
Your best work.
What is the name of your first book?
The name of my very first book, let me turn around and maybe over my shoulder. It's a book called Irish Folk and Fairy Tales. Gotta be here. Up here, I gotta reach. This is my very first book, published when I was very young, and it's really bad. You shouldn't read it. It's really, really bad, because I sort of didn't know what I was doing. But it's still in print today. It's still available.
And who inspired you to become a writer?
I became a writer because I was a reader. If you are a reader, one day you will wake up and go, I can write better rubbish than this. That's how most writers start. I have never, ever met a writer who wasn't a reader. And usually when I meet young men and women like yourselves, there's always someone in the class who is a great reader, who reads and reads and reads and reads and reads. And you look at them and you go, you could be a writer. There is nothing stopping you now. There's nothing stopping you being a writer. If you can write a big story, because books are big stories. If you can write a big story, you can publish it. And just to give you an example of how big a book is, let me reach for, actually I'm going to reach for, this is the Spanish language edition of The Alchemist, which is here. The Alchemist is about 80,000 words. That's about 80,000 words in there. If you were to write on every single line of your school copybooks, your school notebooks, you get about 1,000 words per school notebook. So The Alchemist is about 80 school books, full. And then as time went by, each of the books got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the last book, The Enchantress, is over 100,000 words. So that's 100 school notebooks. So in total, the series is about 650,000 words. So that's about 650 school notebooks.
Wow, and
so
how
just
long?
think about that for a minute. That's the size.
That's a lot. How long did that take you to do The Alchemist?
Each book takes me about a year to write, and then it takes you guys about 2 days to read. And then and that's what's really interesting about particularly this area of fiction. It will take us authors about anywhere between 9 months and a year to write a book. And then it takes you a couple of days, or sometimes a couple of hours to read it. I remember talking to J.K. Rowling, the great J.K. Rowling, and it took her about a year and a half to do her last book, to do the last Harry Potter. And she said, what was really interesting was that within a couple of hours of that book being published, people had read it and finished it, and wanted her next book.
Oh, wow. No pressure.
No pressure.
Can you tell us a little bit about Anna Dillon?
Anna Dillon is my other name. I write romantic fiction. Here's Anna Dillon. Anna Dillon is my other name. Oh, that's Michael Scott. Sorry, wrong book. I also write romantic fiction, which is great fun to write. But when I started writing romantic fiction, my publisher said to me, women readers will not accept romance written by a man. Which is just nonsense, complete nonsense, because I would maintain that if you pick up a book and say, oh, this was written by a man or this was written by a woman, well, then I think the author has failed, because the author has inserted themselves into the story. For me, I think the story is the thing. So Anna Dillon was a name I chose. It was my wife's name, and I borrowed her name. Well, she would say I stole her name, but I borrowed her name. and I wrote as Anna Dillon. And for a long time, Anna Dillon was much more successful than Michael Scott ever was. I never did signings as Anna Dillon because I just don't look good in a dress.
What is your favorite genre to write in?
I have to say to you, my favorite genre is young adult. It's the best genre. And one of the reasons it's a great genre to write in is that you have a great connection with your audience. I always say the difference between writing for adults and young adults is an adult will say to you, oh, I just read your last book and it was rubbish. A young adult, because they read much more carefully, will say to you, I've just read your last book and on page 54 this happened, and on page 72 why did you do this, and on page 134 why did Sophie say this to Josh? So they're reading much more carefully, and often those questions make you go, oh, they're right, you know, that's a mistake, I should have fixed that. And that's one of the great, it's that feedback which makes it so special. And
now you have quite an extensive knowledge on folklore, mythology, legends. Did you study it in college? Have you always had an interest in it since you were a little kid?
I sort of always had an interest in folklore and mythology. I mean, I'm coming from Ireland where we have a great oral tradition, where the stories are carried on and carried on. But I grew up reading the Marvel comics and stuff like that, and I grew up with Superman and Batman and Spider-Man and the Hulk and the Thing and all of those things. And they are sort of modern myths. But as I began to collect the Irish mythology, I began to realise that lots of stories all across the world are very, very similar. In Ireland, there's a very famous story called The Children of Lir, L-I-R, and it's the story of 4 children who were changed into swans. In China, there's the story of 4 children changed into dragons, and in India, it's tigers, and in Kenya, it's jackals, and in Native American folklore, it's grizzly bears, and in Inuit folklore, which is Eskimo folklore, they're changed into polar bears, but it's an identical story. So then I began to collect all of this world mythology. And, you know, I spend a lot of time in America collecting American mythology. And people say to me, you know, leaving aside the Native American mythologies, surely America has no myths. But of course, that's completely untrue. Because when the waves of immigrants are coming into America, coming in from Europe, coming across from Africa, coming up from South America, coming in from China and Japan, they brought with them their music and their songs and their languages and their stories. They brought with them their stories. So America has lots and lots of little bits and pieces of world folklore, which is all joined and fused together, which makes it a fascinating mythology.
I noticed in the book that all the characters are based on real people or legends, other than the twins. I would just imagine that that would take even that much longer to make sure you incorporate it all. What
makes my series so interesting, what makes the Flamel series so interesting is that the only 2 created characters are Sophie and Josh, who are the twins. Everybody else in the series is based out of history or mythology. So if I'm writing about Joan of Arc, you can read about Joan of Arc. Or if I'm writing about Dr. John Dee, you can read about Dr. John Dee. And Dr. John Dee, for example, was a real man. Dr. John Dee was Queen Elizabeth I's magician, mathematician, astronomer, astrologer. This is the guy who chose the date for her coronation. That's how important Dee was to Queen Elizabeth I. But Dee was also Elizabeth's spy, and he would travel all across Europe, pretending to speak none of the languages, but actually speaking all of the languages. And when he would send his messages back to the Queen, he signed them in a certain way, so she would know they were really from him. And his signature were 2 long O's that looked like eyes, because he was the eyes of a queen, and a dash that looked like a 7. And he was the original 007.
I love that.
And in the British Library, you will see the first time ever we see 007 in print. And when Ian Fleming came to give James Bond a call sign, that's where it comes from. So the book is full of all of these great bits and pieces.
I love that. When I finish reading a series, I find myself often missing the characters and sometimes wondering what they would be doing. Now that your series is over, I'm curious, do you miss the characters at all? Or
you know, you live with the characters for a really long time. I mean, it took me 10 years of research before I wrote the first word of the Flamel series, because I had to make sure that all the bits and pieces I put in were correct. So there's 10 years of research. And then each book took about a year to write. So it's about 16 years I've been living with these characters. And now that they're gone, there is a sense of loss. But I'm really lucky because readers like yourselves have come back and said, but what about Scathock, or what about Sophie, or what about Josh? And what I'm doing now is I'm writing a series of short stories to fill in all the little holes in the stories. And I'll go back to them someday. I will return. It's such a big world, I will return.
Yes. Okay, just a couple more questions from myself, and then we'll turn it to the students. You use a lot of imagery and a lot with color and sense. And I'm curious, does that reveal itself as to why later in the series? Or
yes.
okay.
Yeah, that was the short answer. The reason why I do that is colour and smell are really important senses which we sort of ignore sometimes. And I was reading some fascinating research about Alzheimer's and people who suffer from Alzheimer's who are losing their memory. What some researchers have done is they bring them back in smells from their childhood. So if they're suddenly smelling the smell of burnt toast or smell of sweeties from their childhood, that triggers a whole section of memories because scent memories are stored in a different parts of our brain. And if I ask any of the young men or women behind you to tell me the smell of their grandmother or their grandfather's house or the smell of their own home, each of them will have a different answer because it's those smells are the smells we remember and we associate.
Okay, now, I've been saving this question for last because I'm most excited about it. As I understand, they started working on the movie for The Alchemist last year. Are you allowed to share any updates on when the movie's going to be released and how that's coming along?
The movie is quite fun. The movie will be produced by a guy called Lorenzo di Bonaventura, who made a couple of small movies called Transformers, which are quite fun. And I've just seen, by the way, this is a complete aside, I've just seen the new trailer for Transformers 4, which is Dinobots in it. You know, robot dinosaurs, what could be better? And it's great fun. And I spoke to Lorenzo very recently and he was full of the great stories about making the movie. So the story is at the moment that they are casting Sophie and Josh, because they're the hard ones, and they will look for brand new actors to play Sophie and Josh, and they will try and do the movies back to back. So we're looking at least 3 movies, maybe 4 movies. The script is more or less done, the actors are more or less there, and it'll be fun to see it. And it'll be really interesting for me to see it, to see the images. But what they've been really good at, they've involved me every step of the way. I've seen a lot of drawings, a lot of the imagery that they're going to use. It is going to be spectacular.
Oh, I can't wait.
It's going to be amazing.
I can't wait. Do you know when? What year?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
You know,
what I have discovered about movies is they take a really long time.
Yes. Well,
and the movies that they rush out are really never good. But they're doing this properly.
Well, that's wonderful, and it gives us time to read the rest of the series.
You can, yes.
I forgot to ask you, can you tell the kids about your other jobs and things that you've done?
Sure. Over the years, like most writers, I've had all sorts of odd jobs. I was a bookseller for a very long time. When I became a bookseller, I really wanted to be a librarian, which is just the best job in the world. And I couldn't be a librarian, so I took the next best job, which is a bookseller, which I did for a really long time. Then I became a TV producer for a while, and I produced Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, for example, which was great fun to do. And I produced a lot of reality stuff and a lot of soap. And then in the last couple of years, I've drifted into being a full-time writer, which is, I've got to say to you, the best job in the world. It allows you to travel all over the world because it's all research.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we're going to start asking you questions from the students. So
Sure.
The first question is coming up. Kavindu, coming right here. You can have a seat right there.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. My question is, I saw a movie called The Lost Medallion, and at the end I saw your name in it. Were you at all involved with it?
No, unfortunately. Funny, you're not the first person to say that to me. What's really interesting, Michael Scott is such a common name. And when I first went over to America many years ago, people said to me, are you the Michael Scott from The Office? You know, because they thought I was that Michael Scott. But no. What's interesting about The Office, actually, when that was originally a show which originated in England, and the Michael Scott character in England is called David Brent. So it's not called Michael Scott at all. But no, that wasn't one of my movies, so sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next question. She's coming on up.
Take your time. The last time I did one of these, a young girl raced through the audience, fell over the person in the front row and banged her head.
Oh, no.
So, good morning.
My question is, how do you picture Flamel?
Oh, interesting question. How do I picture Flamel? People always think that Flamel is me because he was a bookseller and I was a bookseller. In the book, he's sort of a 50-year-old man. And if you know an actor called Hugh Laurie, who plays in the TV series House, I've always sort of seen Flamel in that way. The easiest one for me to remember is Dr. John Dee. Many, many years ago, I did a series of Star Trek books with an actor called Armin Shimmerman. And Armin Shimmerman played Quark on Deep Space Nine. And he was Principal Schneider on the Buffy series, if you've ever seen the Buffy series. And Armin is a wonderful actor. So when I write my Dr. D stories, it's always Armin I see in my head. It's interesting because when I write characters, I have to see them very, very clearly. Because if I can't see them clearly, you as the reader are not going to see them easier. But for me, Flamel is always Hugh Laurie out of house. And we're actually looking for him to play Flamel in the movie. I think he'd be fabulous.
That reminds me, how did you first come across Nicholas Flamel? Where did you first hear about him?
Oh, that's an interesting story. I was working as a bookseller, and I was in Paris for a bookselling job. And I took an afternoon off, and Paris is a beautiful city, but it's a very confusing city. Lots of little windy side streets. And I went down a side street, off a side street, and I ended up on the Rue de Montmorency. And halfway down the Rue de Montmorency, on the left-hand side, is a little house called the Auberge Nicolas Flamel, the House of Nicolas Flamel, which still exists today. It's the oldest house in Paris. Now...
Oh, sorry. Oh, great.
Have you frozen us up? We're all frozen.
I did. I'm sorry. I was trying to do something I probably shouldn't do.
We're back. No, we're good. We have a little movement. And I came across this house called the Auberge Nicolas Flamel, which is a restaurant. And I went inside and I sat down there and I had a cup of tea. And I'm looking around this house, which is 600 years old. And I knew a little bit about Nicholas Flamel. Now, Nicholas Flamel, as you know, appears in the very first Harry Potter book. And people think that J.K. Rowling created Harry Potter or that I stole Nicholas Flamel from J.K. Rowling. But Nicholas Flamel was a real man, like everybody else in the series. And what's fascinating about Nicholas Flamel is that the story I tell in The Alchemist is a true story. One day, Nicholas Flamel, working as a bookseller, buys a book called the Codex. It was written in a language which he could not understand. And he and Pernell, his wife, spent 20 years travelling Europe looking to translate this book. And when they left Paris, he was a penniless bookseller. But when he came back from his travels, he was extraordinarily wealthy. And he founded churches and hospitals and schools, and some of those exist in Paris today. There's actually a street called the Rue Flamel, and just around the corner is the Rue Pernell, named after his wife. I mean, that's how important and how famous they were. And then Pernell dies, and then a few years later, Nicholas dies. And on the date of his death, his house is broken into by thieves looking for his great wealth. But the house is empty. The house was a shell. So the thieves reckon that he had been buried with all his great wealth, which was not uncommon in those days. So they dig up his grave, they open his grave, and the grave is empty. And then they dig up his wife's grave, thinking maybe he'd been buried with his wife. And it too was empty. And then 4 years later, we have a report of Nicholas and Pernell Flamel spotted in Rome. And then they're spotted in Berlin. And then Queen Victoria talks about, 400 years later, Queen Victoria talks about meeting this French couple called Nicholas and Pernell Flamel. And the story grew up that the book that he had found had the two great secrets of alchemy: how to turn ordinary metal into gold, which gave him his wealth, and the secret of immortality, how to live forever. And that's the basis of my story. But sitting in his house, which is an amazing experience, what's interesting is Flamel was not my original hero. My original hero for this series was Dr. John Dee. It was originally called The Secrets of Dr. Dee. But sitting in the house, I realized that Flamel, this ex-bookseller who finds this magical book, was a much better character, and then Dee became the villain. So that's the origin of the story.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, good morning.
My question is that are those all your books?
Every single book you find behind me was written by me. I've been writing now for nearly 30 years, and I've published 106 books. And I'll stop soon, I promise. While you're there, let me show you, because it's quite fun, let me show you some of the covers for Flamel, which I think all of you will find interesting. So this is the original cover. And this is the first amazing cover created by a young artist called Michael Wagner. And so that's the original cover. So then lots of countries they liked those covers so much, they kept them. So there's the Spanish language cover, which you see is identical. And then we have the Russian cover. And if you look at it, you'll see that they've made some changes. They've made changes to the center icon. It's now a candle, and some of the icons around the edges, which is a shame, because on the books that you have in the background, which I see some of the students holding, there are lots of secrets in the covers. There's lots of secrets, lots of little clues to the story written in there. So that's that. So then we have, so here's I think this is the Chinese cover. Let me see. This is the Korean cover. And they've gone for identical cover with just in the Korean language, which looked absolutely amazing. I can't read it, but it looked great. So that's that. Then we have the Chinese cover. Again, looks very beautiful, but again, it's identical. So it went to Germany, and the Germans said, we love the cover, but we don't like the colour. So the Germans made it blue, which is really cool. The only problem is that the colour of the covers also have to do with the characters. So the first book is called The Alchemist, so it's named after Nicholas Flamel. And Nicholas Flamel has a green aura, and that's why that book is green. And all the colours are relating to the characters. So let me show you three final ones. So this is the Israeli cover from Israel, and they went for something really different, really odd and strange, funny. That's the bell, we'll ignore. And then in Iran, here's the Iranian cover, which is more or less the same. So all of those are really nice. But then, back here in Ireland, the publishers decided that they didn't like any of those covers, and they produced this, which is awful. It's really, truly, dreadfully awful. This, by the way, is supposed to be Sophie and Josh here, and this is supposed to be the Golden Gate Bridge here. And what's really interesting is that the books have sold all over the world and done really well, except in Ireland. Because people pick up the cover and go, that's just rubbish. And they're rubbish.
And you don't get to say yes or no on the covers?
I get to say yes or no on the American covers, and they've been really great, because what happens is I'm able to tell the artist what I'd like to see, and then he sends me these amazing illustrations. On the foreign covers, I don't have any control. And sometimes, like the English cover, which it just gets a bit out of control,
Okay, thank you, Sadie.
What's your favorite book in the whole series?
Oh, my favourite book in the whole series. I got to say to you, it's the last book, because I was so relieved to finish it. What I did with the series was I wrote the very ending first. I wrote the very last chapter before I wrote even book one. So I always knew I was writing to that spot. And once I came to the end, some bits and pieces changed, but once I came to the end, I was so relieved to be done, because it was a really complex series as it grew bigger and bigger, and I was relieved to be finished. My favourite book of all times is probably, funnily enough, there's a book here called, let me see, can I find it, called The Children of Lear, which is my very first children's book. And I'm looking around, I can't see it here. Children of Lear was my first children's book. It was my first #1 bestseller. All of those good things. And that's my all-time favourite. I know I'm putting it back in my head to the camera. I can't find it. It's on one of these shelves. But Children of Lear is my all-time favourite. Thank you.
Where did you graduate?
Where did I graduate? I didn't actually graduate from college, because what happened was, when I was about your age, my father died, so I had to go out to work. So what I did was I worked during the day and I went to college at night. And eventually I graduated, but many years later. But, what's interesting is, because I was a reader, because I was always reading all the time, that made writing so much better. And when you get, for example, you will get an essay to do from one of your teachers. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to sit down and start writing it immediately. That's always a mistake. First thing you do is you begin to research. The way I researched this series for a very long time before I started writing. And what I got to say to you is, by the way, when you are doing your research, do not be using Wikipedia for your research. Wikipedia is rubbish. It really is. I went onto Wikipedia recently and found I was 10 years older than I was. Someone else's books had been added to mine, and I had a beard. And I've never had a beard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, how do you plot or plan your books?
Oh, great question. Usually asked me by someone who wants to be a writer. There are two ways of writing. There are two types of writers. There are the type of writers who just sit down and begin to write and write and write. And they're very rare, and I'm in absolute awe of them. I'm the other type of writer. What I will do is, once I come up with the original idea, I want to see, can I write it out on one single sheet of paper? Because if I can see the whole idea from start to finish on one sheet of paper, I know I can write the story. Then what I'll do is I will go in and I will, first of all, write the ending. So I'll plan the ending first. So I knew, before I started this series, how it would end. And then I began to work backwards. So let's say, come back to, you get an essay or a project to do from one of your teachers. Most people start at the beginning, and then you're writing towards the end. It's much, much easier if you write your conclusion or if you write your ending paragraph first. Because what you then say, okay, so this is what I want to say at the end. What do I need to say before that? And what do I need to say before that? And then what do I need to say before that? And as you're doing this planning, it will reveal the research that you need to do. So if you're writing about, for example, I'm in the first book, The Alchemist, it's set in San Francisco. I knew that I had a big set piece on the Golden Gate Bridge. So I knew I needed to know how long the bridge was, how wide it was, when it was built, all of those good things. And then I actually went to the Golden Gate Bridge and stood on it. Because until you're standing on it, you don't realise the smells and how cold it is, because the wind coming in off the bay is so blooming freezing. And all of those things I can then put into the book. But my best advice to you is start at the end, work backwards.
Hi.
Good morning.
If you could change anything of a character, what would you change?
Oh, you know, this is a really interesting question. I was thinking about it recently. If I was reading to you, because I would read to you usually from The Alchemist, and when I would read to you from The Alchemist, you would hear me stumbling and stuttering, because what's happening is I'm rewriting that book in my head as I'm reading it to you. The book I would change most is probably the first book, The Alchemist. I would probably make Josh a little bit less whiny, because in the series, it's about twins. It's about Sophie and Josh, who are a brother and sister. They're 15. He's working in a bookshop. She's working in a coffee shop. And they've grown up together. They've gone to the same schools. They are identical in every way. And then I give Sophie magical powers, and I don't give Josh his magical powers until a book later. And he gets a bit whingy and whiny about that. And I would probably change that. I'd make him I'd make him a stronger character. Initially. That's the only real change I'd make. Great question.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Scott, we're going to do 2 more questions.
Sure.
Okay, so Gurjat's coming up.
I have a question.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
My question is that what book or author inspired you to make the book?
Oh, that's actually a really, really great question. When I was your age, I was reading and reading and reading. And there's a couple of books which stuck with me, which I really love. I read a book when I was your age called The Borrowers by an author called Mary Norton. And The Borrowers are about the tiny wee people who live under the floorboards in your house and steal all your stuff. So that when your pencil goes missing, the borrowers have taken it. When you lose your hairbrush, it's because the borrowers have taken it. And The Borrowers was a wonderful series, and that really, really inspired me. I really wanted to read about them, and I really wanted to write about the borrowers, actually. And I had the great good fortune of meeting Mary Norton, who was a very old lady, and I said to her, I would really like to write another Borrowers book. And she opened the drawer of her desk and she pulled out the manuscript to the last Borrowers book. The other series I read is, I'm a huge fan of Huckleberry Finn. Not so much of Tom Sawyer, but Huckleberry Finn, which I love. And when I travel across America, touring, going from bookshop to bookshop and school to school, that's the book I read, I bring with me and read. So, The Borrowers. If you want to read something very special, read The Borrowers by Mary Norton.
Okay, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with the students?
My last thoughts are, well, lots of last thoughts. One of the things I would say to you now is that you guys have opportunities which I never had. You can expose your work to a worldwide audience in the way that I never could. And if you write to authors, they will write back to you, because we like this interaction. We like you to tell us, usually we like you to tell us how great the book is. We're not so keen when you tell us what's wrong with it. But actually telling us what's wrong is really good, because it allows us to fix the next book. So never be ashamed, or never be afraid, or never be shy about writing to your favourite authors or getting involved, because that's really important. And if you want to be a writer or a photographer or an artist or a poet or a sculptor, just do it. You need to do it. What I would say to you as a last piece of advice is, all of you guys are going to spend the rest of your lives on keyboards. So do learn how to type properly. It is so important. Otherwise you will ruin your hands. Learn how to type properly. Do take a typing course. Just do it. Your hands will thank you when you're older. You get the pleasure of the last question.
Yes.
did you put 300 pages in one day?
Oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. What I did was, when I was creating this series, I wanted to give it a really tight time frame, to give it a lot of energy and stuff. So all the action in book 1 takes place in 2 days, and all the action in book 2 takes place in 2 days. So by the time you come to the end of book 6, only a week has gone by. And that's when you realise, and this is sort of a bit of a spoiler, is that the entire 6 books, it's really one big fat story. That's what it is. And lots of writers, you know, if you read Game of Thrones, it's spread out over years or decades. My book is spread out over a week. And I use that because it keeps the story moving, keeps the action going. And if you think of all the stuff you do in a day, if you were to write down everything you do in a day, I reckon it would be 300 pages as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, is there significance behind the date, May 31st?
Yes, there is. There is a significance to every single thing.
I knew it. That's why I asked. I had a feeling.
There are no. Someone said to me recently, there are no accidents in this book, and the answer is correct. There are no accidents, even down to the colour of the covers. Each colour representing a character. All the clues to the covers, all the clues to the characters are in the covers. The books are full of these little secrets and everything. And I mean, a big piece of my later books, for example, is set in Indian mythology, the Indian subcontinent mythology. And I'm using Vimanas. And Vimanas are basically flying saucers. And people said to me, oh, but you made up the Vimanas. And I went, no. In the Ramayana, the Vimanas, all the great Indian gods fly across the heavens in Vimanas. I have made up nothing from this series, except Sophie and Josh. But Sophie and Josh are twins, and every single culture all across the world has mythology about twins. Any twins here today, by the way, I meant to ask?
We do have a twin. We do.
Josh.
Yes.
Oh, you have a Josh. Well, Josh, this is your book. The thing about twins is twins are often considered two halves of the one person. One is good and one is bad. But really, what twins are, the pair of twins make one complete person. And as you come to the end of the series, you'll see why I made them twins. And even the names, Sophie and Josh, are clues. Anyone know what I'll give you a clue to Sophie. What does Sophie mean? Does anyone know? Sophia. Sophia means knowledge. So everything, you can research everything about this series. This is why you need a good librarian to help you. Oh, and here's a good librarian.
Oh, Mr. Scott, thank you. I have to say, you had mentioned that, you know, to not be shy and to reach out. And I have to say thank you, because you helped me prove that. I just happened to reach out to you, and I was so pleasantly surprised when you responded. So thank you for proving to them that you are accessible and authors want to talk with students and that they should do that. You are proving that to them just by doing the Skype. It's just so amazing. Thank you for your time.
But authors, and not just authors, most people will. Most people will do it, because you are the next generation of writers. You are the next generation of readers, the next generation of photographers and artists and painters. And it's my job to say to you, if I can do it, you can do it too.
Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I have a favorite ask on the spot. I don't know if you'd be willing to do this. Can we hang up and then I call you back in a few minutes? We're going to try to take a picture around you so that you're in our group photo. Are you up for trying
So
that?
you want to organize everybody?
Yeah, we're going to assemble because it's 85th graders. Okay, so we're going to call you back in just a few minutes and then we'll be ready to go. Is that okay?
Okay. I'll be sitting here waiting.
Okay, thank you so much. Just a couple minutes. Thank you.